Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome back to A Dome of Ice and Fire, the Lost in Adaptation sub-series that focuses on how well Game of Thrones holds up when compared to its source material, the Song of Ice and Fire novels by G.R. Martin. Hopefully most of you will know the drill by now, but just in case there's any newcomers choosing to start with episode 5 for some reason, this is regretfully not spoiler safe. I will be blurting out plot twists willy-nilly from any and all seasons of the show and books. You have been warned. Okay, let's do this. The parts of this episode that are loyal to the book are Sir Barristan standing vigil for the late Sir Hugh because he had no family to do it in King's Landing. King Robert attempting to join the Hand's tourney, but being too fat to fit into his armour anymore, prompting him to pull a prank on his Lannister squire by telling him to find a device to stretch the metal out. Eddard eventually talking him out of fighting. Sir Gregor Clegane getting owned by Loras Tyrell of Highgarden and turning out to be a bit of a sore loser, cutting his horse almost in two and trying to do the same to the Knight of Flowers. The Hound being the only one willing to go up against his brother, Robert eventually stopping it with his kingly shouty voice, and everyone collectively deciding not to hold the Mountain accountable for attempted murder. Littlefinger's theory that young Sir Loras had used a sneaky trick involving horny horses to help him win, though amusingly it was Sir Barristan who got upset by the idea, not Sansa.
Sir Loras would never do that, there's no honour in tricks.
The revelation that Catelyn had used a cunning misdirection in regards to where they were going to throw off pursuit, loudly claiming that she was taking Tyrion north to Winterfell, but instead going east to the Vale and her sister in the Eyrie. Tyrion saving Catelyn despite not being particularly keen on her, all things considered, from 3 men no less in the book. Varys coming to have a real talk with Eddard about Robert being in immediate and pressing danger of assassination, also giving him the goss that Jon Arryn was indeed murdered by a poison called the Tears of Lys. Arya training by chasing cats around, finding the old Targaryen dragon skulls, overhearing 2 people who, while not 100% confirmed to be Varys and Magister Illyrio in the books, almost certainly were, escaping through the sewers, having to convince the Gold Cloaks, who, now they look closely at them, appear not to be wearing gold cloaks, who she was, and her father not taking her story seriously. Yoren, the Night's Watch recruiter, coming to give Ned the heads up about what his wife had done for their mutual brother Benjen's sake. Robert finding out about Dany having a bun in the oven and being determined to send an assassin after her. Ned deciding that this was probably worth taking a knee during the national anthem over, and quitting when Robert threatened to fire him. Littlefinger suggesting that Ned stick around for just a little longer so he can show him to the other person that Jon Arryn had been looking for before his death. Catelyn finally arriving in the Eyrie and discovering that her sister has gone completely gaga since the last time she saw her. Eddard finding yet another bastard child of Robert's before getting attacked by Lannisters and losing 3 men, including his good friend Jory. I'm not proud of this, but for me at least, the emotional impact of Jory's death was lessened somewhat in this show by how bad I thought the guy playing him was at acting. Every time he opened his mouth, his dull monotone completely took me out of whatever scene he was in, so I was almost glad to see him go. Sorry, Jory. This episode seemed keen to go the extra mile with these small details from the book, which is always nice to see. You get a look at the Silent Sisters, the Burkard nuns that deal with dead bodies and funerals for the nobility in Westeros. You get to hear the wisdom of Peter Baelish on how whores are a better investment than ships because of the reduced chances of one of them sinking. Also the Hound going to one knee mid-battle, causing his brother to deal a deadly blow to the heir. There's a few things that took place in this episode that already happened in the book, like the aforementioned reveal that Sir Mormont is a spy for the crown. Renly is once again a tad hard done by in the show, being portrayed as being a bit whiny about his lack of sword skills and a stinking pile of wuss about the sight of blood. As I've mentioned in episodes past, while he never quite got tested in battle in the books, he was at least confident in his own abilities as a warrior. Barristan Selmy took part in the attempt to talk sense into Robert and was actually the first to point out that no one would risk attacking the king. Eddard just jumped on the idea when he realised he was onto a winning argument. While the bet between Littlefinger and Renly did take place, it was on a joust between Sir Jaime and the Hound, not Sir Loras and the Mountain. Baelish confidently bet on the Kingslayer because he didn't think Clegane would risk beating the pride and joy of the house he was sworn to, which proved to be a vast underestimation of how little fucks Sandor gave about anything. The battle with the Mountain clans was predominantly on horseback in the book, but ye gods, filming that shit would have been a nightmare. Tyrion was given a double-bladed spiked war axe in the book, so he didn't have to rely on a disguise discarded shield to kill his enemy. Varys' support of the assassination plot to kill Daenerys and her unborn child seems a little illogical when you consider that much later in the show it's revealed that he was secretly rooting for a Targaryen comeback this whole time, something even Dany herself calls him out on. I'll go into more detail when we get to that point, but for now, suffice to say, there's a chance that there's slightly more Targaryens kicking about and not being dead in the books. There's a few new scenes added in here and there in this episode, and oddly, all of them fall into the category of, well, I guess that could have happened, but it happened to non-POV characters or during other people's chapters, so we don't know. There's a scene with Bran, Theon, and Maester Luwin where you see that Bran has developed some abandonment issues from his mother running off before he woke up. A scene of Theon trying to show Ros the Hooker why they call them the Iron Islands. An amusing scene of Varys and Baelish trying to out-creepy each other in the throne room. A scene of Robert and Cersei having a conversation about their chances of surviving a Dothraki attack, followed by a rare moment of vulnerability from Cersei. And a scene of Renly getting, as the Australians would put it, a gobby from Loras Tyrell, which means it's finally time to discuss the big question relating to Renly Baratheon. Was he, or was he not, a homosexual in the book? Well, let's put it this way. I think he was, but I'm more than willing to admit that the evidence in the book was far from definitive, and most of what was there was in A Clash of Kings. Basically, all there is to go on is he's quite close to Loras, proven by them plotting together, and him showing him preferential treatment when he was king, and he once invited him to stay in his tent after a commander meeting so they could pray together. Oh, and I guess you could also count how he chose to dress his Kingsguard, but, let's leave that for next season. The show clearly decided to throw hinting out of the window and fully embrace the gayer side of G.R. Martin's work. The Eyrie is not particularly book accurate, I'm afraid. The Arryn's ancestral home was originally a very small castle built halfway up a very tall mountain with multiple towers leading up to it guarding the very narrow mountain path. Evidently, the show went with a much shorter mountain and the fortress appears to be carved out of the rock itself. Also, apparently this mountain is hollow, I guess. It's a bit confusing, but it looks awesome, so fuck it. Varys appears in disguise for the first time when he comes to talk to Ned in his chambers, and it's so effective, Ned doesn't even recognize him from point-blank range. He's in a completely different disguise later when meeting with Magister Illyrio, so Arya doesn't clock him either, though she does mention there was something familiar about him. This may seem overly paranoid, but the show ended up driving home the wisdom of these precautions as word of his activities gets back to Littlefinger, who lets him know that he basically now has the power to get Varys executed anytime he wants. Robin Arryn was actually called Robert in the book, but his nickname was Sweet Robin, so they just switched it to that. Almost certainly because there were already two Roberts, and they wanted to reduce the potential confusion. Which is fair, lots of people having the same or very similar sounding names is a genuine issue in the book when you're trying to keep things straight in your head. And now we come to one of my favourite changes in these adaptations. Yes, I do have those. You see, the fight in the streets of King's Landing between the Starks and the Lannisters doesn't go down quite the same way in the book. For starters, Ned and his men were mounted, it was night, and it was tipping it down with rain, but that's nowhere near as important as the fact that Jaime and Eddard never ended up crossing blades in the book. Jaime threatens him, Ned threatens back, Jaime orders his men to take Stark alive but kill his guards, then buggers off and lets his soldiers do all the fighting. Eddard's leg was originally broken when his horse slipped during the fight and fell on him. It's like, gods damn it, George, you edging son of a bitch, you can't get me so close and refuse to finish me off. You're welcome for that mental image, by the way. The show, on the other hand, takes pity on us. It gives us exactly what we wanted and then some. The wolf versus the lion, some hardcore Sean Bean sword action. This fight scene was straight up fan service, and I loved it. Yet more people and houses are name-dropped as competitors in the tourney, the Freys amongst others. Robert has two Lannister squires in the book, both sons of Tywin's brother Kevin. The missing one in the show, Tyrek Lannister, wasn't massively important as he was quietly killed off-screen, as it were, in A Clash of Kings during the riots in King's Landing. Or it's possible he might have been bumped off because he knew too much, it's not made entirely clear. Oh, and FYI, Lancel is barely 15 in the book, so it seems that Cersei is a bit of a pedo as well as a bitch. After he's talked into giving up on the idea of taking part in the melee, Robert confesses to Eddard over a drink that he knew that his piece of shit son was lying about what happened on the King's Road and told him that he was truly sorry for ordering Lady's death. He goes on to explain that he is well aware that Joffrey is a dickhead. He said he might even have given up on being the king and run off to become an adventurer by now, but for the thought of Joffrey being on the throne with Cersei whispering in his ear. Also, in a bit of a heartbreaking moment, he claimed that now that his best friend was there, he was going to turn it all around and be a good king from then on. A sentiment that only lasted until he got the news about the Targaryens. alterations. Robert casually mentions that he's been fantasizing over this Marjorie Tyrell girl that his little brother keeps talking about. Then later in the tunnels, Arya overhears Varys talking about the plot between Renly and Soloris to get Robert to dump Cersei for her, reducing Lannister power in the realm in favour of Tyrell. Sandor's supposed to be wearing his dog's head's helm in this part of the story. In fact, he wears it almost all of the time in the books unless he's drinking. Don't get me wrong, Rory McCann is awesome, so I'm glad he wasn't hidden under his armour the whole way through the show. I guess I'm just surprised that the show was so dedicated to putting all that makeup on him every day when they had an easy out available. Much to Robert's amusement, Jaime is humiliated when his helmet gets bent and stuck on his head after losing to the Hound. They eventually had to lead him off to have a blacksmith remove it. Soloris ended up conceding the tourney and the massive amount of prize money to the Hound because he felt he couldn't ride against the man who just saved his life. Sandor was popular with the people for the first time in his life, though it didn't improve his mood or his personality one bit. Thoros of Myr, who FYI had no hair in the books, Game of Thrones hates baldness, ended up winning the melee with the scary sword he dipped in wildfire and set ablaze, and Anguy, a young man who would also eventually end up in the Brotherhood Without Banners, won the archery contest. In the show, Varys advised Ned that he'd decided he really was a decent bloke after all, but they left out the specifics of what finally convinced him. In the book, he explained that Eddard had unwittingly foiled an assassination attempt on Robert. Cersei, it seems, had reverse psychologied him into promising to join the melee competition, and Varys had gotten word that someone in the tourney had been paid to accidentally kill him in the brawl under the assumption that he would be pardoned for it afterwards, but would probably be betrayed and executed by the Lannisters. There were multiple Hill Clan attacks on the way through the Vale, so many that only a fraction of the original party survived the trip. In addition to Bronn, there was another sellsword who tagged along on Catelyn's quest, a unpleasant gentleman named Chiggin who didn't fare nearly as well in battle. Tyrion's 2 guards were taken prisoner too in a futile attempt to stop word getting to Casterly Rock about the kidnapping. At Tyrion's behest, they were both rearmed during the attack so they could help fight, but neither survived the journey. Marillion, the singer you briefly see at the inn and then getting hit with a rock on the high road, was more of a character in the book. He came along on the trip because he sensed adventure and sang mean songs about Tyrion until the dwarf stepped on and broke his fingers during the battle. In addition to setting off with too small a party to discourage attacks, it appears the ever-wise Catelyn Stark also forgot to bring sufficient food with them to make it all the way to the Eyrie, so they were forced to butcher some of their horses for sustenance, including Tyrion's that had been a gift from his brother and carefully trained for him in his custom saddle. He was understandably a tad resentful over this. While Tyrion does point out the lack of logic involved in arming an assassin with one's own blade, and yes, that is a bloody stupid thing not to think through, fuck you Catelyn Stark, you single-minded dumbass. In the book he also mentions that he never would have lost the knife in the scenario that Littlefinger had described, as Lannister pride wouldn't let him bet against a member of his family in any circumstance. Jaime tells her the same thing when she's interrogating him in A Clash of Kings, finally making her realise that she's been a stupid head. As part of an attempt to get her to understand what the man was really like, Tyrion told Catelyn that Peter Baelish often claimed that he took both Lysa's and Catelyn's virginity when they were teens. This might well have been true in the case of Lysa, but was confirmed as a lie with Catelyn, as she remembered being a virgin on her wedding night with Eddard. This is not the last time that this lie comes up. Everyone's war cry was their capital city in the book. Winterfell, Harrenhal, Casterly Rock, that sort of thing. Amusingly, Marjorie Tyrell is the only person who ever does this in the show. Bronn's side switch doesn't catch Catelyn completely off guard in the book because she made a note on the journey of how much time he was spending with Tyrion and the rapport they were clearly forming. Tyrion took the time to inspect the bodies of the clansmen they defeated and observed how crap their stuff was and how skinny their horses were. This was how he knew they might be amenable to an opportunity to improve their lots in life, something that was played off as a spur-of-the-moment thing in the show. When Arya is chasing cats around, she comes across a young Princess Marcella and a very young Prince Tommen. They don't recognise her covered in filth and she cheeses it to avoid them reporting her activities and getting her in trouble. The other Stark household guards, people like Harwin, Desmond and Fat Tom, all played parts in the story in the book, but the show reassigned all notable activities to Jory to keep it simple. Soloris gave out a whole bunch of roses to girls during the tourney, but Sansa convinced herself that hers was special because it was red and not white like the rest. During the murder meeting, Varys suggested using the Tears of Lys as a way of killing Dany, prompting Maester Pycelle to do a double take, not a man who would do well in professional poker. Bryden, the Blackfish Tully, met Catelyn at the Bloody Gate and rode with her to the foot of the mountain. He'd gone with Lysa to serve in the Vale years before because of his long-running dispute with his brother Hoster, the Lord of Riverrun. It was he who tried to warn her that Lysa had gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, a foreshadowing that was reassigned to Tyrion in the show. When Catelyn arrived in the Eyrie, the original plan was to spend the night in the lowest tower, then make the climb the next day, but Lysa sent word down that she wanted to talk to her sister ASAP, so Catelyn was forced to make the climb up the mountain in utter darkness on the back of a mule. She's helped by a friendly, black-haired bastard child called Mia Stone, who Catelyn takes an immediate dislike to simply because she is a bastard. Because of course she does. Fuck you, Catelyn Catelyn Stark. It's strongly implied by how often it's mentioned that Robert sired a bastard daughter in the Vale that she is one of his, possibly even his first. Sir Barristan was at the small council meeting and he was the only one who backed Ned up with his let's not murder a 14-year-old girl counter-proposal. Littlefinger doesn't own the brothel where they found Robert's daughter. That honour goes to a woman named Ashayaya, who's only briefly mentioned here, so we'll come back to her later. Ned reminisces at one point that, despite how much his friend had idealised her, his late sister Lyanna wasn't looking forward to marrying Robert at all, knowing he'd sired so many bastard children before getting engaged to her and convinced that he wouldn't be able to change his ways just because he got married. Gosh, I wonder what that was foreshadowing. The Dom's final thoughts. You'll notice this episode didn't have any Daenerys scenes whatsoever. I suspect that's because they'd gotten so far ahead with her plot compared to the rest of the characters, they needed the others to catch up, or they'd be in danger of showing the assassin trying to kill her before he was hired to do so. There was quite a lot cut out here, but nothing I really mourn the loss of. I guess with the possible exception of the Blackfish, it might have been cool to see him around sooner than the show decided to introduce him. The pacing of this episode flowed really well because they left out the not strictly necessary, and more sword fights is always a sure path to the Dom's approval. Episode 5 did good, in my opinion, as both a standalone form of entertainment and an adaptation. Hey beautiful watchers, I just wanted to give you a quick reminder that there's a variety of rewards you can earn by becoming a Patreon, including early access to all videos, getting to be a part of the survey about how many people saw the film and read the book, or playing Minecraft with me on my 24-hour server. Higher level contributors can also join the Dom's Skype chat room and best of all choose future episodes of Lost in Adaptation. However, if right now you are thinking, my goodness the Dom, I can't do that,
I'm a denizen of the fiery pits of Tartarus, and I shall consume your pathetic world and all of your souls.
Fear not. Well, actually I think we should fear a little bit, but anyway, if you would instead be willing to like, share, subscribe, or a combination of all three, that goes a long way towards helping my channel grow and reach new beautiful watchers. Have a most pleasant day, and I will see you soon.